Hello, it's Jess, and welcome to my solo board game guide. In this video, I'm going to be sharing with you and rating some of my favorite solo board games and solo variants of multiplayer games that I currently own and love. I'm going to give you the high-level rundown of some of my favorite solo games, give you their rating, some of the pros and cons, and if you want to skip through any parts of the video, I'll be sure to leave timestamps down below. Also, keep in mind that I'm pretty new to board games, so my collection is obviously kind of small, but growing. But nonetheless, these are some of my favorite games so far. Starting with Tiny Towns. This is actually the first board game that introduced me to the concept of one-player board games. This game can be played with 1 to 6 players, meaning it can be played both solo or with a group of up to 6 people. I love games that are versatile like this, that you can play solo and multiplayer. It just gives them so much use. You can whip it out at a party or play it by yourself. Now, what is the game all about? In this game, you are the mayor of a tiny town filled with adorable creatures, and you have to help them build a town from the ground up and make it as epic as possible. You start out with a 4x4 grid. You have a set of building types that each require different rule sets and different combinations of resources to be able to build them. In the solo game, you have a deck of resources and you have 3 to choose from in each round, and essentially you need to strategize and pick which buildings will get you the most amount of points in the end, while also being limited to the resources in front of you. So at the end of the game, you tally up your points, and based on the number of points you get, that is your skill level. I absolutely love that there is a scoring system based on how many points you get. I think that really makes you work towards something, towards becoming a master architect, and you can essentially keep competing against yourself and your past scores to achieve this, and yeah, I just think that's so great. I also think that with this game, the solo variant is just as fun as the multiplayer variant. The quality of gameplay does not diminish either way. I think if you're new to board games and you're just starting out, this is a great first game to add to your collection. This was the first one in mine. It's super easy to pick up, like the rules are not too complicated, but they're also not too simple, so that it actually stays exciting to play. It's definitely very replayable. I've probably played it by myself at least like 50 times. It's also obviously aesthetically very adorable and the components are well made. As for the cons, I actually can't think of anything bad to say about this game. I think it's perfect. Overall, I would give this game a 10 out of 10. Next, we have Final Girl by Van Ryder Games. And I have a lot of games in this set. So the Final Girl series is truly a solo board game because it is strictly a one-player game. You can't play it in multiplayer. And if you're into horror, then you will love this. In this game series, you're playing as the final girl in a horror movie trying to defeat the killer and potentially saving several other victims along the way. And there's so many different themes to choose from based on popular horror movies. So for example, I have the Nightmare on Elm Street based one. I have a Insane Asylum theme. And then I have the Happy Trails horror summer camp horror movie theme. Yeah, they're all fantastic. In order to play, you need to get the core box, and you also need to have at least one of the actual Final Girl games. So I'll explain this game super high level because it's honestly a little bit complicated. But if you're just starting out, I highly recommend getting the Camp Happy Trails box to start out with. Just because it's the most straightforward one. Each game has its own like variations of the game, little add-ons. It's super cool. But if you're just starting out, this is definitely the most simple one. This is the game that is referenced in the actual instructions that come with the core box. The overall premise of these games is you play as one of the 2 final girls that you select, and you're ultimately trying to defeat the villain and potentially save a bunch of other victims along the way. The victims are represented by these yellow meeples, and you can save them by walking them around to the green exits, and you get some perks for doing that. And the killer or villain is represented by the red meeple, and pink is you, the final girl. And each turn has 5 phases. The first is the action phase, where you're playing the action cards in your hand. and you can perform different actions such as searching for items, attacking the villain, or sprinting around the board. And you determine what you actually get from this card by rolling the dice. And essentially, the more stars that you roll, the better your outcome. Phase 2 is where you plan for your next action phase and basically stock up on more action cards. Phase 3 is the killer phase, where you draw one of the terror cards. This is essentially the villain's move. And these terror cards are brutal. They can really mess up your plans. Lastly are the panic and cleanup phase, which are essentially resetting your game for the next action phase. You continue cycling through these phases until the game ends in one of two ways. Either you successfully defeat the killer, or you get killed by them, aka you lose. And that's Final Girl in a nutshell. So first of all, what I love about this game is the packaging is chef's kiss. The core box and all the Final Girl boxes are the size of a VCR case, and all of the board components are actually magnetized. So you take it out of the case, and this is literally part of what you're playing on, which I think is just so genius. It doesn't take up too much space on your gaming shelf, which I really appreciate. The second thing I love is just the overall theming and art. Again, if you are into horror, these games are perfection. As for the cons, nothing too crazy, but of course, as I mentioned, you do need to buy the core box and the games themselves in order to start playing, so keep that in mind for your budget. And winning this game is actually so challenging. I think I've only beat the game maybe once or twice. So yeah, if you get frustrated easily, this might not be for you. And one last thing that I find to be slightly annoying sometimes is some of the rules you'll run into are not super rigid. Like there's certain scenarios that you'll run into while playing that are a little ambiguous, like you can actually choose what kind of game you want to play. Overall, I would give this game a 9 out of 10 just because of the last point I mentioned, but otherwise, amazing game. Next up, we have to talk about the Stardew Valley board game. I have a bit of a bias towards this game because I am a major fan of the video game. That's the reason I bought this board game. And if you're into the video game like I am, the board game is heavily inspired by the video game. I think the creators of the video game helped create this game. So it really truly encapsulates everything Stardew Valley. With that said, I'm gonna try my best to give an unbiased review of this board game from a gameplay perspective and not just as a fan of Stardew Valley. So this board game can be played solo or with up to 4 players, and if you're playing with others, it's cooperative, meaning you work together rather than competing against each other. So how do you win this game? There's 2 objectives in this game, the first being to fulfill 4 of Grandpa's goals. For example, catching a legendary fish, or making it to level 12 of the mines, or getting enough chickens in your farm. And the other objective is opening all of the community center bundles and fulfilling the items in each one, just like in the video game. And these required items can be anything from fish to forageables to crops. And you have a limited number of turns to fulfill all of these things. The game is played basically through the 4 seasons, and each season has 4 days in it. And each of these day cards activates certain things. For example, maybe a crow eats your crops, or it rains, so your crops grow. And each player, or just you if you're playing solo, has 2 actions they can take per day. These actions include growing crops, or fishing, or mining, or gaining forageables, or processing geodes, or donating to the museum, or making friends. There's a lot of actions you can take. So the things I love about this game is just the abundance of Stardew Valley references. The art is gorgeous, and if you are a Stardew Valley fan, then this is honestly a must-have in your collection. And I kind of treat it as such. I kind of treat it more as a collector's item than just as a board game, which leads me to the things I don't really like about it. To be honest, I don't find this game super replayable like the other games on this list. Again, I consider it more of a collector's piece, and if I didn't know what Stardew Valley was, I don't think I would have this in my board game collection. Once you get over all of the excitement of the references and play it once or twice, it kind of becomes a little bland. I think that comes from the fact that there's only so many Grandpa's Goals cards and bundles cards available in this game. I wish that they added more of those cards. So, you know, it just gets repetitive really fast. Also, the quality of the components is noticeably not fantastic, which is something I don't really care too much about, but I know some people do. So rating it purely from a board game standpoint and not a Stardew Valley fan standpoint, I'd give this game a 7 out of 10. And the last solo board game I have in my collection is Woodcraft. If you're into things like Stardew or Minecraft or Animal Crossing, where you're crafting things from wood, then you might be a fan of this one. To summarize, Woodcraft is a cute but intense game where you play as forest people running competing workshops in the woods and crafting goods for your customers. And it can be played both in solo mode or with up to 4 players. I call this game intense because it's actually quite difficult to learn. There's a lot going on, so if you're new to board games, it might be a big learning curve. I know it was for me. If you're looking for a game that you can just quickly learn how to play and start playing it within an hour, this is not it. This took me an entire day to finally learn how to play. And to win this game, you have to gain as many victory points as possible, which are represented by chestnuts. And you gain points in a number of ways, from crafting items, buying things using the currency, which in this game is represented by blueberries, which help you buy supplies, plant trees, expand your tool shed, and accumulate a trusty squad of adorable looking craftspeople who give you bonuses. You also market your products and build a trusty reputation. The list goes on. There's a lot happening in this game. Once you actually get the hang of it and get good at this game, because there's so many actions you can take, you can really make some epic combinations. The game has only 14 rounds before it's over, but you can really get a lot done within those 14 rounds. Now, with the solo variant of this game, instead of playing against other people, you're basically playing against a deck of cards, and all it does is essentially create roadblocks and potentially sabotage your plans. So that's the gist of it. Now, what I like about this game is obviously it is beautifully done. The components are very high quality. And the other thing I love is because of the complexity of this game, once you actually learn how to play, there are so many combinations of moves you can make. No 2 games are truly the same, so that makes it incredibly replayable and addicting. I'll also say that as much as I love playing it solo, it's super fun, I don't think solo mode is comparable to multiplayer. Playing against the deck of cards is definitely noticeably less challenging than playing against other people. With that said, just because it's slightly less challenging doesn't make it any less fun of a game. So I would give this a solo board game score of 9 out of 10. And there you have it. Those are my reviews and rundowns of the solo board games I currently have in my collection, which is definitely growing. And if you guys have any favorite solo board games or board games in general, be sure to leave them in the comments down below. And thanks for watching. I'll see you guys next time. Bye!